Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me as ever is my fellow traveller in everything therapeutic, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you doing, Ken?
Refreshed to be here, Rory, and it's a refreshing time. We had a bit of a hot summer here in the UK, and there's a bit of a turn at the moment where the jet stream is now bringing in the colder air and the rain. So if you hear any noises in the background that sound like the pitter-patter of rain, that is the rain on my studio roof, Rory.
Well, there you have it. The rain, the other side of the screen, which is 40 miles away, the sun is blazing through the window at Counselling Towers here. So it just goes to show what the quirks of the English weather. And we've got a fantastic episode today, haven't we, Ken?
We have indeed. So what can you expect from Counselling Tutor Podcast? Episode 85, we're going to be kicking off with a really interesting topic, and that is the concept of here and now in counselling. That's a good one. That we could go really deep. We could probably do a whole episode on that. And then going into practice matters. And this is something that has come up again and again and again. Really, really important. And it borders on unethical if not handled correctly. And what is it? It's looking out for client dependency on the counselling relationship. And Rory's going to be going into depth on that. And he's got a super duper handout. So make sure you stick around to find out how you can get hold of that. And then we're going to be ending episode 85 by looking at why people choose to study. And this is about you. Why are you choosing to study? There's many roads that bring somebody to a counselling course, and we're going to be kind of dipping our toe into a few of those roads. Have you ever dipped your toe in a road, Rory? I think I'm mixing up my metaphors.
I think you are mixing up your metaphors. I don't think I've had to put my toe in the road. I think I might have put my shoe in some time, but never walked barefoot on it. So there you have it.
So kicking us off, we're speaking about the here and now. I've got a little pet word that I've never mentioned to anybody except my wife. When it comes to regards to the here and now, because of course here and now is about present moment awareness. It's not just about counselling, but within counselling we do work specifically in person counselling in the here and now. And my little pet word for the here and now is the hairy new, Rory, the hairy new, because my mum was Scottish, and whenever she said here and now, it always sounded like a hairy new.
A hairy new. well, there you have it, Ken. I don't know what I can say to that, really. A hairy new. Yes, I think the here and now is something that we really do need to pay attention with in counselling. And when I think of the here and now, I'm drawn to that very famous video by the three approaches in counselling and psychotherapy with Carl Rogers and Albert Ellis, and of course Fritz Perls, who seems to be terribly cruel to Gloria. And if you have a chance, it's on YouTube. You could just type in three approaches to psychotherapy. But when Gloria was working with Fritz Perls, he talked about Gestalt therapy, and he talked about equal and present time. And I think that is really, really important. So I just don't think it just fits for Gestalt. I think it fits for any therapy. That when we're working with a client, we're in equal and present time. And we're only the second podcast in, Ken, and I'm already going to mention our good friend Transference.
Bring it on.
Bring it on. Because what can happen is when we're working with a client, they can sometimes go back to earlier development stages, earlier difficulties in their life, traumatic events. And as a therapist, we need to really anchor ourselves in the here and now. We really need to project equal and present time. And, it can happen where clients start to go back to, their childhood. I don't mean that people regress and become children. It can happen, but I'm thinking where maybe clients are talking about their past, their upbringing, and all of a sudden you notice a change in their demeanour. They become quite childish, or they may talk with a different tone of voice or a different timbre of voice, which would reflect that developmental stage they're in. They're not in the here and now, they're in the past. And I think a therapist's work is to very gently help the client come back from that earlier time and into the here and now, along with the associated person they are. So, I always say to myself, I'm 60, not 6. I think it's a great metaphor. If I'm feeling maybe that something's happening, it's bringing up a transferential issue in my life, I say to myself as a way of checking myself, come on, Rory, you're 60, you're not 6. And that brings me back into the here and the now, the reality of who I am now, not who I was. And I will be talking in further podcasts, and certainly I'm going to be doing a lecture on the work of Babette Rothschild, who gives us a really good protocol for clients who are having flashbacks.
Really interesting stuff. And it's interesting when this topic came up, and I gave it a little bit of thought, and I went down the path of the client and linking that to person-centered therapy, which is a here and now therapy. We can only work here. We're not working with the past, although clients may bring material from their past. But I really like how you've anchored the therapist into the here and now by what you've said there. It doesn't matter what modality you're working. You, as the therapist, you need to be very firmly planted in the here and now. And so with the client's journey, when the client maybe goes back to a sensitive part of their life and they start bringing the material from that part of the life, my understanding from a person-centered perspective is there's other than hearing and recognizing what that client has been through, there's no work that can be done back in the past. What is past is past. We can only come to the present and maybe reframe that into the present and say, I hear of all that you went through. I'm feeling those terrible feelings that you were explaining to me at that time, but I wonder, as you sit here right now and you look back on that, how do you feel? And that brings the feelings from the past, one technique, I guess, to bring it into the here and now, into the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, when we're working as therapists, no matter what modality we work in, we're seeing presentations of trauma more and more in the therapy room. When I started, it was something that I suspect it was around, so I'm not discounting the fact that 15 years ago when I trained, it wasn't around. But I think people are better able to articulate it. Clients are better able to articulate it, and crucially, therapists are better at recognising it because there's more training and more awareness around it. And I do think that working in the here and now is where the work is done. If there's a takeaway from this, it's that you can only do the work. A client can only do the work and make the changes in their life in the here and now. You can't do it in the future because they're not in it, and they can't do it in the past because it's gone.
Very powerful. And there's some interesting experiments that you can do for yourself about here and now awareness. So mindfulness comes to mind. Mindfulness is about being in the present moment, living in the present moment. And I guess mindfulness is a way of being. But a great experiment that you can do, and one that I remember you doing with us when I was training with you, Rory, is with a raisin, where you take a raisin and you start off by just looking at the raisin. You put the raisin on your hand, you look at the raisin and take in all that the raisin is in terms of its shape, its color. Has it got any imperfections? Look at the wrinkles on the skin of the raisin and fully focus in on the raisin. And then very slowly, when you're ready, take the raisin and place it onto the center of your tongue. No chewing, no tasting, just on the center of your tongue, and close your mouth. And what does that feel like? What does your mouth react like when you place that raisin in the center of your tongue? And then very, very slowly you would move that around your mouth. What does that feel like? And then you would bite into it. What tastes come as you bite into it? And all this is a great experiment to do with peers on bringing you into the here and now. Because if, as a therapist, we are asked to be in the here and now, we need to understand the difference of kind of getting lost in the past, getting lost in the narrative, and being able to pull ourselves into the present moment and having that present moment awareness of who the client is right there in the room.
Absolutely. And with that present, equal and present time, it also brings all you are. So, if I bring my present self into the room at 60 years old, that is who I am. That is who I am, not someone in the past. And I think that a lot of therapists now, certainly those who have done trauma-informed practice training, realise that trauma comes from the bottom up. And any kind of reparative work or any kind of therapeutic work is from the top down. In other words, our top part of the brain, the thinking cap, as my grandfather used to refer to it, I'll put my thinking cap on, lad, is the part of the brain that takes executive control and can hold us in the here and now. Whereas with Traumatic responses, it's usually the middle brain that takes control, and that doesn't have a timeline. It usually just takes us back to the place we were when the trauma occurred. And, that's like a time machine. It can take us back 20 years or 30 years. Here and now is where the work's done, and it's where the client is. And I think it's useful for therapists to kind of understand that, not only for the client's sake, but for their own sake.
So important. And Rory, you're speaking about working with trauma. You spoke a few paragraphs ago mentioning that you kind of seeing it or recognize it more and more in today's practice. And I recognize that you've done a lot of training on trauma, Rory, a lot of continuing professional development over the years. And I wonder if it's not the training that allows you to see it more clearly and work with it within the practice room. And just kind of with that in mind, I just want to put it out there that if you are a member of the Counselling Study Resource, and that is a paid-for part of Counselling Tutor, we do a lot of free stuff, including this podcast, which is 100% free. We've got counsellingtutor.com, which has got hundreds of free articles that you can reference when you're doing your assignments or when you're covering topics. But we do have a paid-for section called the Counselling Study Resource, and that is jam-packed with resources and lectures that Rory does. And there are a number of lectures on working with trauma, working with clients with trauma, understanding what clients are going through when they are subject to trauma, what's happening. And you were speaking about the thinking cap, Rory. You really go into the brain chemistry in those lectures. And of course, all the lectures in the Counselling Study Resource, you can claim them as continuing professional development. They are certified. You can print out a certificate to say that you have done that study. So if you're a member of the Counselling Study Resource, log in, go to the lectures, and go look up and underpin your understanding of here and now by that trauma learning. If you're not a member of Counselling Study Resource, you can find out more by just going to counsellingtutor.com. But really important topic it is indeed. And of course, we always look as counsellors about our practice, and we're about to speak about practice matters, and we're about to speak about a really important topic, and that's client dependency on counselling. Tell us a little flavour of what we can expect today.
Yes, I think as any principled counsellor and someone who practices ethically and with boundaries, it's really good to have an eye on why the client is coming to you. What are they wanting? Is it therapy they want or something else? And if it's something else, we need to clearly define what that is and really make a principled decision of, are we giving our clients therapy? Or are we actually being our client's friend or fulfilling a different function? And if we are, we really need to think about, why we do that, and also think about maybe how we can not do that, because we are there as therapists. So I'm going to be talking about client dependency, and I'm also going to discuss how we can identify when clients are coming for something other than therapy.
Such important learning. We're going to get that from Practice Matters, which is after this short message.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
One of the things counsellors have to be aware of is creating a symbiotic relationship with a client, sometimes referred to as codependency. The aim of therapy is to help the client gain autonomy, be able to function using their own sense of self, not being dependent on others as a child might be. So what is the process of dependency? Well, for someone to become dependent on you, they must believe that at some level they, without you in their lives, are incomplete. As most abusers know only too well, consistently undermining someone's confidence to the point they cannot make their own decisions without reference to the abuser's approval is a well-known process, and it's sometimes referred to as trauma bonding or Stockholm syndrome. So what do we as therapists need to know and understand? Well, one of the reasons that counsellors are asked to access their own therapy is to explore who they are, the whole person, including those areas which may be out of awareness, and if not highlighted, may impact on the therapeutic relationship or relationships. Areas such as attachment can, if not explored, be played out negatively in the therapy room through a phenomena known as transference, countertransference, or projective identification. So for those of you who don't know what transference is, and if you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you probably do. Transference is where we attach the thoughts and feelings of a past relationship or situation onto someone new. And an example of that may be meeting someone for the first time and thinking, oh gosh, this man's scary. He looks like my old headmaster. And that can sometimes happen. We meet someone new in our lives and all of a sudden we get some very kind of childlike or fearful feelings. It's very, very possible that what's happening is we're seeing someone who looks like someone from our past, and what we're doing is we're projecting those feelings of the past onto this new person. Which brings us to countertransference. This is how we respond to transference. And in this case, meeting someone who looks like your old headmaster may invoke the thoughts and feelings from being a child at school, then responding not as the adult you are, but in a childlike way based on the past and not in the here and now. And finally, projective identification. This is where someone says something about others they really see in themselves. I recently heard someone on a bus berating the driver by saying he was stupid and should get an education. On hearing this, I wondered if the person saying it was actually talking about themselves. So what are the signs that a client may be becoming dependent on you? Well, we have to be aware of client affirmations such as, I don't think I could live without these sessions, or can I have your phone number so I can call you if I need to speak? When you hear a client speak like that, certainly if they want your phone number out of hours and out of the session time, you have to think really, really carefully what's going on in the relationship. And the crucial question you need to ask is, who am I to the client? Sometimes clients present for something other than therapy. May very well be that you've done a piece of work in therapy and that's been completed. And then all of a sudden you realise that the client is attending for something that's other than therapy. They may just want a bit of a chat, or want to catch up on you, or want to know more about you, maybe trying to lay the ground for friendship. And of course that can be quite a dangerous path to walk, because at the end of the day, the client is someone who is getting a service from a therapist. It's not a befriending agency. So that's something to look out for. Sometimes clients seem to have more and more issues which need to be worked on in therapy. One of the things that become apparent through the years talking to other therapists is that occasionally clients will come for one issue, and all of a sudden as the therapy comes to an end, we'll start bringing more and more and more issues up. And this could be that they're forming an attachment to you, that it could be that they're seeing you as something other than the therapist and don't want to leave you. Some clients are more interested in the therapist than they are in themselves. This can be an interesting phenomenon where the client spends a lot of time asking you about your life and what's going on for you. Again, maybe trying to lay the ground for building a friendship relationship, which of course isn't what people come to counselling for. Being friendly and approachable to clients, of course, but being their friends is really a dangerous path to tread. Clients who also say you remind them of their father, mother, sibling or a former lover. This sometimes happens, and this is transference. This is where someone may be taking the feelings of a past relationship and projecting them onto you. And in that case, that really does need addressing. And sometimes clients who act out in the therapy room by acting in a childlike way. Now, I'm going to make a distinction here. Some clients disassociate. In other words, they go back into their child place. And certainly if they're talking about very difficult material, may very well come from a very childish place. But what I'm referring to is clients who are kind of acting out almost like they're in a different relationship to that one of the counsellor. Maybe it could be discussed with, you remind me of my father, you remind me of my mother, and then almost going into a childlike interaction with you. That can be a real indication that transference is going on, and also that they're seeing the therapist as someone other than who they are, the therapist. They're seeing them as maybe someone from their past. That's the nature of transference. So I'm going to look at a case study just to give you an example of how a client may work with this. So Counsellor Abby has been working with a client, Nita, for over a month. The last session, Nita discloses that as a child she longed for a big sister as someone who would protect her from her arguing parents. As the sessions progress, it becomes apparent that Nita is seeing Abby as the sister she never had. It becomes clear that Nita is becoming more and more dependent on Abby. So how should Abby respond to that? Well, the first thing that Abby does is consider her own counter-transference. Is at some level she's responding to Nita as the big sister she never had? I think that sometimes counsellors need to really ask themselves the difficult fundamental questions when this type of thing comes up, and ask themselves, I wonder if I really am kind of in an adult relationship with my client, or is it that I'm working with counter-transference? In other words, I'm taking on the role of a big sister, and in that case, I'm really not doing my client any favours. So what Abby does is she goes and takes her material to supervision. And in cases like this, a supervisor may offer an observation, which I found outlined by Gerald R. Brandle in a book called Theory and Practice in Social Work. And he states, when transference is unacknowledged, gentle confrontations may draw the client's attention to surface phenomena that suggest its existence. Depending on the client's response, the therapist can comment that the client seems to be experiencing the therapist in a particular way. And he gives an example saying, I sense that you may be feeling a bit irritated. I suspect that if in this fictional scenario with Abby and Nita, Abby may very well say to her client, I sense that maybe you see me as a big sister, and that might generate a really interesting discussion, because when transference is around, we really can't have elephants in the room. I think if a therapist picks up on transference from the client, I think it's really useful to gently and but firmly challenge and explore it. To sum up, client dependency may very well be a form of transference, and as therapists we need to ask ourselves the question, are we the adults in the room? And if we are the adult, how do we respond? And I think that that's a really good baseline. If I'm working with a client, I try and stay in the adult place, that I'm the adult, I'm the 60-year-old man in my case that I am, and not be anything other than the therapist. And sometimes I have to say that through the years of practice, it can be challenging, because it's sometimes what happens is people will see you as somebody else. They may see you as a other in their life, a father, grandfather, a former partner, that type of thing. And I think that if that is the case, that can really, really build dependency. And we have to be very careful of that. The other way of looking and working with client dependency is to have a regular review. Some persons, sensitive therapists, don't like the idea of reviews. My personal view is I think that they're very useful. A 6-week review every 6 weeks, just reviewing with the client and speaking to them and asking how they think the therapy's going and what they've resolved and how much more therapy they think they need. And from those conversations, you can get a very, very good sense of if the client is actually coming for therapy and wants a duration of time with you to be able to sort themselves out, or if they're coming for something else. And after all, the whole idea of a role of a counsellor is to make ourselves redundant ultimately.
Thank you, as always, Rory. Really important topic. And of course, you can get Rory's super duper handout. And how do you get that? Well, you just go to counsellingtutor.com. That's the place to hang out if you are a student of counselling and psychotherapy. And on counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcasts tab. You'll find that from our top menu. Go to episode 85. Episode 85, you're going to find all the show notes from everything we've spoken about today. Any external links can be found on that page, and you can download Rory's super duper handout from that very page as well. That's episode 85 on counsellingtutor.com. But moving on, and we're looking at the study of counselling and what kind of brings people to study counselling, Rory.
Yes, it's interesting. Through the years, There's been lots of research done. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I recently was looking at some, asking why do people come to study counselling? And I think it's really interesting. When I used to teach, the very first lesson was that, why do you want to be a counsellor? I thought it was so important, very principled, for people to voice their reasons for wanting to enter what is a very curious profession, really. I can remember when I declared to one of my friends that I wanted to be a counsellor, he said, listening to other people's problems for a living, that's a strange occupation. And I said, well, I'm kind of thinking that I'm helping people help themselves, as opposed to, obviously, I will be hearing people's difficulties. But we used to do, right at the beginning, why do you want to come to why have you become a counsellor? And there's this old idea called the wounded healer, and it's based on some Greek mythology of Chiron. I think it's actually pronounced Chiron, but it's spelt with a K. Go figure, the Greeks. And basically he was a god, and he was doing a bit of hunting one day, and he was hit with an arrow which had some poison from the head of the Hydra. They really didn't know how to Greek it up in those days. And he was in eternal pain, and he looked eternally to heal himself by healing others. And I think there's a nugget of truth that I think some people do come to counselling because they've had difficult experiences in themselves. And in our Facebook page, and if you don't know where our Facebook page is, if you type in Counselling Tutor into Facebook, you'll find two pages. One's our business page, where you can give us a review. So give us a review. And the other is our closed Facebook page. Knock on the door, we'll let you in. And there's 19,000 people studying counselling or interested in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And this does sometimes come up. Why do people study counselling? Well, and people will tell their own stories and say, well, I've had difficulties. I want to give back. I want to help. And I think it's a very principled thing to do. But some people come for other reasons, Ken. Some people just want to get qualification or are interested in the process of personal development.
100%. And if you look at episode 84 last week, we spoke about goals and what are your goals for your study year. And this is all going to kind of link into that of what brought you into counselling study. And Rory, you've already mentioned a couple of routes in there. And it can be vocational. You may be a teacher and you think, this would really help me in being able to relate to the children when they bring me problems. I know that there are pastors that go and study counselling to be able to work with issues that are brought to them. As you said, Rory, self-development. What a great reason to go and study counselling, because you end up looking at yourself. And I wonder how many people really know that studying counselling is that level of self-development. I know it was surprising for me. I thought counselling was learning about how to talk to people, listen to people, and how to help people. And when the mirror was turned on myself, I was quite surprised, Rory, pleasantly surprised. Out of interest, I wonder what it's like. I'm going to go and do an introductory course just to see what it's all about. And one of the things that was surprising for me is when I found out what counselling was about. I was enrolled on a course, and my understanding of what counselling was very different to the definition I was getting from the textbooks. And I guess that's been reflected across my journey, that when I speak to people about being a counsellor, the general public seems to have very limited understanding of what it is that counsellors do or don't do. There's a great misconception that counsellors deal out this sage, wise advice, but many different roads that bring you in. And of course, there are those that have a defined goal, maybe want to, as you say, Rory, from their own journey, go out, put that hand into the darkness in a specific area. An example of that is maybe somebody who is in recovery from addiction might choose to want to work in that field, to give back, to help others that are lost. And they may, of course, enroll on a counselling course as part of that journey. But not everyone who starts a counselling course wants to be a counsellor, I guess. And I guess not. The skills are still sellable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people who do certainly the level 2 and the level 3 may very well go on to use their skills in other forms of helping, social work, recovery workers, key workers, police officers, paramedics. The list is, long, absolutely long, where people use it to develop better communication skills. And then, of course, when people go on to the higher levels, they're really becoming counsellors. It's a defined path then. The level 2 and the level 3 are generic, that yes, we learn about counselling theories, yes, we learn about counselling skills, but generally speaking, those are transportable. And in fact, the term the core conditions came from that. Robert Carcuff, who was Carl Rogers' student, took those 3 conditions of empathy, congruence, and conditional positive regard and just lifted them up and transported them across into a book on social work, because they're transportable. They're transportable ways of being. You could use them in any profession that facilitates help, which is how the core conditions came to be.
I love it when you bring out these little nuggets, Rory. I think we all do. And I guess it's CV gold. I've heard you mention that before, Rory. I love the saying, the wording of it. It's CV gold. There is no job that you could end up going for where any kind of counselling study wouldn't be looked at favourably. It's just CV gold. You can plug it into any CV for any kind of work, and it will be looked at as that's interesting. So it's at the very minimum a great discussion topic for an interview, isn't it?
It is, and also recently in the news, they were saying, or there's been some research, and again, I haven't got it to hand, that states that if you've got a level 4, level 5, or level 6 qualification, you're going to be infinitely more employable. Employers are looking for kind of university level qualifications in their workforce. So that is another positive. I know a lot of people in the Facebook have said, what else can I use my skills for? Huge amounts of work. I've had some fantastic jobs with my certificate in counselling skills. Had some fantastic jobs, and of course, I had a great job when I taught. I became a teacher. I got my diploma in counselling, and the rest is history, I guess. But CV gold, and you learn a lot about yourself.
You do.
The good and the bad.
I'm going to share something from my side. When I went to study counselling, I think it was a little bit out of interest. There was a bit mixed in of maybe I can make a difference, and maybe quite a lottle bit, Rory, that's my new word for today, a lottle bit of I want to get out of this corporate humdrum wheel, this like hamster wheel that I'm treading on, and I thought maybe there's something there. Is it possible that I could leave this corporate world of the suit and tie that I wasn't enjoying very much at the time, and spend my time helping? Started on a 10-week course, and it's many years later now, and it's one of the most life-defining moments of my life is when I drove into the college and said, do you do counselling courses?
Yeah, absolutely can. And if someone asked me the other day, what are the greatest events in your life, and I would say meeting my wife, our daughter arriving. She didn't actually arrive out of space. We knew she was coming, but the birth of my daughter, and doing the counselling course, because each of those events in my life asked me fundamental questions of who I was, and crucially, who I wanted to be. And each one of those took me on a different path, and I'm eternally grateful for it. And there's not a day goes by when I'm looking out the window drinking tea that I don't think of my good fortune of just walking into that class one day and sitting down and just taking a risk, really, as someone I've not been in education for a long time, and just opening myself up to learning and being honest with myself. And I'm eternally grateful for that. There we have it.
Wow. Well, there's a glimpse into Rory's journey, my journey, but this is about your journey. Where are you? Where are you going? What brought you in? What are your goals? Where are you going? And it's an individual journey. We've looked at the different reasons why somebody might come and study counselling, and your reasons are your reasons. It's not a competition. Not everyone is heading in the same direction. It's just I guess goes back to enjoy the journey that you are on, and we're here as Counselling Tutor, as the Counselling Tutor Podcast, to support you. It's what we do. It's why we started Counselling Tutor. in the first place. This has been episode 85, Counselling Tutor Podcast. We started off by speaking about the concept of the here and now in counselling. In Practice Matters, Rory gave us some really important information about looking out for the client becoming dependent on the counselling relationship. And remember, you can download that handout by going to counsellingtutor.com, episode 85, and it's right there on the page for you. And then we closed off now speaking about why people choose to study counselling, and what's really important is your reasons and where you're going with your counselling studies.
Yeah, why don't you, if you're a member of the Facebook page, and why shouldn't you be, why don't you share your reasons for studying counselling? I think that'll be an interesting thread, and one I think everybody would benefit for. So it's been a great episode, and as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.